Good afternoon, everyone. This is the Sunshine Coast Regional District, and we'd like to welcome you for joining us today. This is a special board meeting that is being held on Thursday, December the 3rd, 2020. I'd like to call us to order at 1:31 p.m. and acknowledge that the Sunshine Coast Regional District is on the traditional territories of the Seashelt and the Squamish First Nations, and we're coming to you live from across the region. So thank you so much for joining us today, and we're very grateful to be here. We have an amended agenda in front of us. For anybody that is any members of the public joining us online, you can see that on our website at scrd.ca/agendas, I believe, or if you just look on our website, it'll be there. So with that, I'm going to look to the directors to adopt before we go to adopt the agenda. I'm going to look to staff and directors to see if there's any changes that you would like to see made before we begin, or before we move for adoption of the amended agenda. Not seeing anything, I'm going to ask for a motion to adopt this amended agenda, please. So moved, seconded. All those in favor? Thank you, motion carries. We have no minutes and we have no business arising. We have no presentations and delegations. Before we begin on the reports, what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask for a motion to receive all our reports, please. So moved and seconded. Thank you. All those in favor? Thank you. Motion carries. And we'll go right into the staff introduction. And this is going to be verbal, and are there going to be some slides as well, Remco? Okay. Perfect. So we're going to put the floor over to our GM of Infrastructure Services and our Chief Financial Officer. So over to Mr. Rosenboom and Ms. Perot.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I will share my slides. Is everybody able to see my screen?
Yes, Remco, it's looking good.
Awesome. So I wanted to take the opportunity to provide the board with some insight in the considerations that we put into the recommendations as included in the report, fully recognizing that it is ultimately to the board to decide what the user fees and frontage fees will be for 2021. But we thought it would be useful to present an overview of what went in those recommendations as proposed by us, the staff. Let me see how, yeah, there we go. So there are some of the considerations are that there are some legislative and SRD policies guiding us. One is the Local Government Act, which results in that every budget that we adopt needs to be balanced. We cannot budget for a deficit, or we cannot budget for a surplus. The other one is, of course, the environmental permits. We have some are regulated, some of the plants are regulated under the Environmental Management Act, and the other is one under the Sewage System Regulation and administered by Vancouver Coast Health. On the SRD side, we have our financial sustainability policy that was most recently updated by the board, which states that user fees are to fund operations and maintenance of assets, while frontage fees are to fund the capital expenditures related to improvement, replacements, and the more significant repairs. The other one is the SRD strategic plan, which has a strategy to continue to develop and implement comprehensive asset stewardship strategies for all assets operated and maintained by the SRD. Then there is a series of more discretionary considerations. One is the asset management plan for each wastewater system. While they were developed by staff and presented to the board last January, they were not adopted by the board as a formal plan that more has the nature of an policy. So it's more easy to deviate from it in decisions by the board. There is discretion on how to fund immediate asset failures and system performance issues. So when I say system performance issues, I'm referring to issues that are impacting the performance of a system as it relates to our compliance with environmental regulations and environmental regulations. So there are two ways of doing that is with the use of capital reserves and sometimes operational reserves and debt funding loans. For end-of-life replacements of systems, options are capital reserve, loans, and grants. In terms of grants, I would like to know that it's very common that the SRD would need to provide a portion of funding to a grant, and that can be to cover non-eligible costs or to a percentage of eligible costs. A good example is the application we just submitted for Wood Creek, where the SRD still would need to, if approved, the SRD would still need to provide $75,000 in contribution, or the Square Bay grant we received several years ago for the replacement of the treatment plant, where there's still a portion that is funded by the SRD itself. Other discretionary item is how long, if we have a target level that we want to build up in terms of our reserves, 20 years, 10 years, 15 years, to a certain level, how long do we want, and how much time do we want to actually build that up? So when do we start actually saving the money for a system replacement? So staff's recommendation is guided by the strategic plan. It reflects the anticipated operating and maintenance costs for 2021. We understand that the actual funding mix, as I call it, for end-of-life infrastructure replacement is still to be determined. But the certainty is that whole or in part, it will need to be paid for reserves or debt, as indicated, even if we receive a grant. And building up reserves over a longer period of time just allows future increases to be more modest than they would be if those reserves would be built up in a shorter time frame. Then there is the question about funding immediate asset failures. So something that is failing right now prior to the end of the lifespan, or is not performing as we want it, or as it should be, to adhere to the regulations, environmental regulations. Those could also be funded out of capital reserves. The next sheet, this table presents an overview of the end of year capital reserves for the systems currently and what they would be at the end of 2021 if the rates as proposed were to be approved. The table also includes an overview of some of the developments on some of the systems. For Greaves, there is the feasibility. We received grant, and together with some own contributions, feasibility is about to be started to for what the cost would be to upgrade the treatment and collection system. Wood Creek, at last month's infrastructure services committee meeting, we discussed the need for some significant upgrades to that system, and the grant application that was submitted. Sunny side, no urgent issues. Jolly Roger and Secret Cove, there are two budget proposals for one for both. to replace some components of the treatment system because they have failed. Scarb A, based on the current 2020 rate, they are not contributing to any capital reserves, as that level was set to only serve the debt related to the SCRD contribution to the recent grants, to the recent upgrades of the treatment plant. And we are experiencing some issues with the infiltration system, with the collection system. Last 2 years, the board approved $50,000 to address those issues, and we're making good progress. But I cannot confirm that yet if those issues are enough, if those funds are enough to actually address the performance concerns with the system. Langdale, one of the other feasibility studies to confirm what needs to be done next. CNU 2021, as proposed in 2022, the fund's fees would only cover the cost of the debt of the recent improvements to the system. Merril in 2020, there was the same, and the proposal is to increase that the fund's fees in 2021 to start building up reserves again, especially given that a feasibility study is underway or to be initiated shortly for upgrades to the treatment system required there in the more near future. Current road, there's another budget proposal to replace outfalls that are about to fail on that system. Roberts Creek is experiencing infrastructure-related performance concerns. We're trying to address them within the operational budget. Might require capital investments as well. We're not sure yet. Little Lake didn't have any reserves in 2020, same as I think both, where funds fees are supporting operation maintenance. So what next steps? Let me see how I can. Yes. As indicated, we're going to start and complete and present to the board results of the feasibility studies for Greaves, Merril, and Langdale to confirm the cost and the system upgrades required for those three systems in the upcoming years. And that would allow us to plan how to fund those improvements, including applying for grants if available. There's the focus on the ongoing assessments and addressing of current performance issues. We anticipate that there will be a need for further engagement and board decisions on funding methods for system component replacement. Will it be reserves? Will it be loans? Will it be will we rely on grants to become available? What are our target reserves levels and timelines to build them up? And of course, towards the end of the year, what will be then the rates for 2022? There's optional, something that staff see as an optional thing to action to take, to consider is a letter signed by the board chair explaining 2021 user fees and fundage fees to all the service participants of all the systems and outlining the next steps in 2021 to clarify the process and to explain the decisions that were made. That was it, and staff are more than happy to take any questions the board might have.
Terrific. Thank you very much, GM Rosenboom. Before I go to directors, I'm going to look to staff to see if there's anything else they wanted to add to GM Rosenboom's presentation. Otherwise, if CFO and CAO are okay, then I will go to directors. And once again, thank you very much, GM Rosenboom. And I know you did that in concert with the CFO and CAO, so thank you very much for putting that together. So first up on my list is Director Lee. And then I have Director McMahon.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I have a question about the frontage fee charges for 2020. On your slide that showed those, I was wondering if we could see that slide again so I could just be sure I was asking the right question. I think it was like 2 back, there was a little chart. By the way, I like this, that one.
Yeah.
It showed no capital reserves for Saginaw and for Lily. And yet the chart shows that we charged $204 a year per user for Lily and $670.27 for Saginaw for 2020. And I believe in 2019, we passed a bylaw saying we could build reserves for these capital reserves. And once we do that, that's all we can use the money for. So I was wondering if I have both of those right, why we don't show a reserve for those two.
Okay, over to staff.
So I can answer, Chair. So the reserve bylaws for Saginaw and Lily's Lake were established actually earlier this year, in 2020. So those particular frontage fees have gone into their operating reserves. So what's on that slide is just the capital reserve bylaws. So we have several wastewater services that have operating bylaws. So it doesn't mean that the funds have necessarily vanished. In the case of Saginaw, their surpluses from 2019 rolled into their 2020 budget and actually reduced their overall requirement to fund the service. So they don't have any reserves in particular, and Lily's Lake have been accumulating funds in their operating reserve. So we established a formal capital reserve bylaw this year.
Will it be retroactively transferred to the capital?
No, because we can't move funds legislatively between a statutory bylaw and the next. However, it doesn't preclude, in operational reserves, you can actually, the way the bylaws are written right now is that you can use them for emerging items. So it would allow them to use some of those funds for capital. So it could be considered as part of their overall funding envelope.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Director Lee, did you have another question, or is it okay if I move on through the list?
I know that was that answered the two questions I had. I had the timing wrong from when we established that reserve, so I got to fix my notes up. Thank you.
Okay, Director McMahon.
Yeah, I actually have a process question about how we're going to go through this agenda. I don't know if you want to tackle it right now.
Sure. Let's. I'll entertain that. What's your specific question?
Well, strictly speaking, we are voting on what to charge this year, but I think all of us have been consulting with residents, which has raised some broader issues about the wastewater function and how they're charged and how we communicate with the residents in these services. So how do you want to tackle that?
Oh, it's a good question, Director McMahon, because I was pondering that myself. I've collected a number of questions myself and have them ready to go too. And I think while we're at the broader discussion, before we actually get into maybe the rates discussion, and I'll look to see how the will of the directors is as well. If we want to have the broader discussion, because because what I'm hearing is a more philosophical piece around communication, around how we move forward, how we go beyond 2021. I'm wondering if now might be that best time for discussion, or because we've had the intro from staff to give us the broad strokes. And I will say, I do appreciate that table as well, reminding us of the projects that we've seen in pre-budget coming forward and seeing it all there. So thank you very much for doing that within the presentation. So, and I'll look to staff too, if maybe the broad strokes of the discussion happen now, and then we get into the granular with the actual decision around the frontage and the utility fees, or the user fees. Does that work for everyone? Because I know we have some broad questions right now that have come up. Okay. All right, so let's do that now. Director McMahon, do you want to lead off then?
Sure. Happy to lead this parade.
Okay.
I met with the Wood Creek Park, a bunch of users from that system on Sunday, and I just wanted to give a big thank you to the Wood Creek Park Neighborhood Association, who not only organized the meeting at short notice, but went door to door and delivered a paper flyer to each and every person on that sewer system. So good for them. One of the questions that arose is that it doesn't appear that users are receiving an annual explanatory statement with their utility bills. And if this isn't happening, it needs to happen, that each person on the sewer system gets an explanation of what this sewer plant is, because some of these people are new. They only just bought into the neighborhood. They know nothing about it. And so they need the background. They need to understand what they're being charged, where it goes, what the reserves are, what the level the reserves are at, how much the reserve is increasing per year at the current rate of fees, and anything that's on the immediate horizon in terms of, capital costs coming up. I believe that statements have gone out in the past, but nobody could turn one up from any time since 2014. So either they all are really bad at filing things, or it hasn't consistently been going out. So that's the very first thing I wanted to flag. I've got a bunch of others, but we could start there.
Okay, and thank you, Director McMahon, because that was one of the things on my list as well, especially with talking with a couple of my stratas last night about, because they have to have, with a strata, they have to be very, very, they fit underneath the Strata Act and have a very clear reporting requirement. So they were looking for that kind of information, or hopeful for that information, especially when you're, purchasing and selling properties and not having it immediately available. But that utility bill piece, a lot of people were missing. And I'll also tag on to that, that apparently in the Area B catchment, there used to be an in-person meeting to discuss what was coming up over the next year, and what some of the decisions, and the staff were available to answer questions around that. So there was the utility bill, as well as a meeting with staff to explain any expenditures and that were coming up. So if that's okay to put that as a two-parter over to staff to address the statement within the utility bills, as well as the in-person meeting, and any history around why that's when we had it and why it was discontinued. If anyone would like to has any history around that, Remco?
Thank you, Chair. I will start off, and maybe our CFO can add to when, if required. It could very well be that 2014 was the last year that residents were able to, that they were able to provide that explanation of the actual spending, because it hasn't been done for years now. I'm not sure why it was stopped in 2014, after 2014, but it was. With the current technology, what we could do is see if we can put it on the internet and be made more transparent on each side for each plant on where the money is spent, and so that it's not only available for the residents but also for buyers, and that people can more easily refer back to it. That's something that we can look into to establish from this year and next year. And in terms of annual meetings, no history why it was stopped. If it was a shortage of staff, shortage of interest by the community, but I'm surprised if that latest one would be the case.
There's certainly a lot of interest now.
I can see.
Yeah, CFO, did you want to add, did you have anything to add to that, or can I go on through the, no, okay, great. Okay, thank you, GM Rosenboom. And Director McMahon, I'm assuming that answers your question there. Okay, so I'm going to continue through my speakers list. Next up, I have Director Ties and then Director Lee.
Thank you, Chair, and I think that such a letter will, or at least providing a reference as to where on the website they can find pertinent information on an annual basis with an updated, that's updated annually would be great. I'm just kind of making sure that I understand the whole debate correctly, and I just wanted to kind of take a look at all of this from the viewpoint of one of the people that are in those wastewater systems, and essentially how it will affect them if they choose not to put capital reserves in, but to rather go with debt financing. And while that may be a feasible thing to do for somebody that's that owns their own property, I don't know if it's a good idea for these wastewater systems that we speak of, because the value of your property would decrease proportionate to the liability that's due to your wastewater system. So if you ever wanted to sell your property, you would probably end up having to consider that. And now that it's public knowledge, I believe the realtor and the owner would have to disclose that liability. And so depending on where you are in the life cycle of your wastewater system, your property value might be very much affected. So if you want to have any kind of consistency in the value of your property, I would think that having a capital reserve is a good idea. So that's just sort of where my thinking is. And so I think having a good mix of a capital reserve as well as some debt financing that could also be turned into grant financing, I think is prudent in this matter. And I just want to warn away people from being too much oriented towards debt servicing of these kind of capital expenditures. So those are just my thoughts. I don't know if staff would want to correct or add to that, but that's how I see the matter.
Okay, I'll look to staff to see if they would like to respond on that, or I know working in the real estate industry, it's certainly something that does need to be disclosed if there is an unfunded liability, or because technically that would be what it is if there's no capital reserve built up. So, and one of the questions, Len, I'll come to you in just a second after you. One of the questions that came up with the stratas last night was that they, when they're filling out their Form B, when there's a sale, there's actually no spot on there to disclose anything about the wastewater treatment plant, because if it was handled by the strata, of course it would be within there. And so that's something that we need to I think flesh out further as a communications piece. But having that available within our website is going to be, I mean, that's huge right there, because then it's readily available for any seller and buyer, as well as for the real estate community. And yes, flush it out and make sure all of the information is out there. Director Lee?
Thank you, Chair. I actually wanted to comment on the last subject before we moved on to a second one. I've got quite a list of subjects I'd like to chat.
Yeah.
But I wanted to comment on the 2014 being the last year of a statement. I've owned this property for 20 years or so, and I used to get statements, and it was a little alarming when they stopped. And I had talked to the director of the day, but I never was successful in getting them restarted. But I, for one, would really like to see them restarted again. It's great for the users to know what their financial situation is. And if my concern was I wasn't putting enough away for capital, I didn't know enough about it, but I was worried because I know everything does fail. So if the suggestion that perhaps it's on the web is a good one, as long as when we go through the statements and we issue and we say, hey, go look here for yours, then it's a good way of doing it. And we talked about the description of the plant, but that actually has been given to us already. And it's on the web. It's a local asset management plan we got in 2018. And it talks about each plant, its makeup, and how it's doing, generally how it's doing over the years. It could have a little more specifics, but there's a heck of a good start already on the web on that half. So that's my comments on that one.
Okay. And did you want to continue on, Len, because you were next on the speakers list?
Well, I was wondering if Donna was on that last subject before we moved.
She'd put up her hand prior to Director Ty speaking. So it's up to you, Director Lee, you're next.
Okay, I'd like to talk about the long-term plans for our wastewater systems.
Mm-hmm.
I think we need to, before we make decisions on those 5-year things, I think we need to get back to our residents with them fully informed and start discussions on that long-term capital, because there is so many options. And some of the concerns I've heard are things like when it's 30 years out and 40 years out, are we going to have a plant? Are we going to have a community plant? Is it going to be expanded to handle everybody within 2 miles? Those kind of things are being said. And those kind of decisions are whether we're aggressive up front or whether we idle for a while and then get aggressive on building up the funds. And I think each individual plant is a standalone entity because they were all built at different times and they're all at different phases of their life. So I think for 2021, we need to take it easy on the frontage fees and get the plan fleshed out. And we might even want to be more aggressive or less aggressive, we don't know. But until that's done, I don't think we should start hitting them in 2021. It's not a good year. Anyways, that's my thoughts.
Okay. Thank you, Director Lee. Up next, Director McMahon.
Sure. And another thing that has come up several times is the fact that utility bills can't be deferred. And this is a problem for seniors. When they were only like $400, it wasn't a big deal. But some of these utility bills now are up above $1,000 and maybe even $2,000. And that's really a hardship on the people receiving them. So I don't know if there is anything that we can look into to assist low-income seniors with these kind of fees.
I'm going to staff. Do we have an answer? Do we know anything about what might be able to because it's not just utility fees, but the other question that I had that came up last night would be around frontage fees, if there was a way they could be deferred as well. So, and CFO, please.
Yeah, so user fees so fees under the Local Government Act are not a tax, they're a fee. So they don't constitute a tax. Frontage fees are also a fee. They're not a parcel tax. So that was one of the things identified in sort of the housekeeping side of the analysis, which I recall that was part of the report, the corporate officer, and as part of the review that was done for bylaw 310. So that has been identified as a desire, and that would require us modifying some of the bylaws. In the interim, there might be some other things too that we can contemplate for people in the interim, and sort of staff are investigating that.
Okay. Thank you. Director McMahon, back to you.
Yeah, I think it's particularly important for anything being put aside for capital, because that really is associated with the property, not with the owner.
Thank you, Director McMahon. Director Lee?
I just was looking for a little clarification on the last statement about frontage fees versus parcel tax. I was under the impression that if we had borrowed money and it had a 5-year payback, for instance, we borrowed money to fix up a chunk of the plant and it's got a 5-year payback, that actually is a parcel tax and appears on the tax bill rather than the user. I was wondering, do I have that wrong, or?
CFO?
So for the wastewater, specifically, those are billed through the utility bills. The frontage is, per the Local Government Act, it's not a parcel tax. Like, that's why we call it a frontage fee, not a parcel tax. So that is not reflected on the rural tax bill. The parcel tax for the water fees are a parcel tax, and they are reflected on the tax bill, where the user fees are billed through the utility bill. It's a little bit different with wastewater.
Thank you.
Okay, Director Lee, does that take care of your question?
If I was to repeat it back, if we borrow capital for a wastewater plant, that's fine, but it stays on the bill. It doesn't go on the tax. Yes, good. Thank you.
Okay, Director McMahon.
I have more topics unless anybody else wants to kick in.
You're the only one on my speakers list right now, so please go ahead.
All right. Around communications, something that I'm hearing is that some of the residents lack confidence that the SCRD is properly maintaining some of the plants. And this has come up around Wood Creek and Langdale. And whether this is true or not is not the issue. The issue is that we need to address this problem, because the residents aren't going to support any kind of plan going forward unless they feel confident that they can rely on the service. Another common thing that I've heard several times is that we're proposing a Rolls-Royce solution to a Volkswagen problem. There are residents who feel that the SCRD is imposing elaborate and expensive solutions on them that are not necessary. Mm-hmm. So these are the kind of things that I think we need to get into. And our new communications manager has got his job cut out for him. The other problem that I'm somewhat concerned about is how we are going to manage to do adequate public consultation in the next year if we're still under COVID. Because I had, I think, 14 users out of 73 turn up for the Zoom meeting. And that's a pretty low turnout when you're thinking about the kind of money that we're looking at here. There was one person who emailed later and didn't know how to use Zoom. And there's people who don't know how to use Zoom. And then there's people who are afraid that the sessions are going to be recorded and shared publicly. They don't feel confident in the technology, I guess is what I would say. There just are situations where you communicate so much better if you can manage it in person somehow. So I'm just flagging that as a real challenge going forward. And now I'll let somebody else talk for a while.
Okay, thank you, Director McMahon. Director Hiltz, I have you next on the list. You are muted right now, sir.
I am not now.
No, you are not now. Go ahead.
Thank you. The theme is the trust within the SERD. That's the Langdale issue. It goes back to 2007 that things were kind of promised, suggested, implied that a solution would be. And so I think that's for me sums up kind of the pushback that the public doesn't feel that the trust in the operations. They're feeling that this is sort of sprung on them now, even though it goes back to 2009, I guess, when all this asset management. So I guess it's the change management and the trust that the SERD is doing this change well. And so for me, it's how do we build back up the trust of the users that their money is being well spent. Like that sort of summarizes what I'm hearing. Aside from people are kind of just gritting their teeth and going, what else are we going to do? You know, so that's kind of to tag on to Director McMahon's theme of trust.
Okay, thank you, Director Hiltz. And that's one thing I heard very clearly as well from my community is the lack of trust and in our organization and to my community. I apologized, you know, because I mean, at the end of the day, it's me that's representing them, and I need to make sure their voices are heard here at the table and take responsibility for whatever has happened before me. And I heard that loud and clear coming from my community as well, is the need for communications and feeling like that we have lost a bit of transparency over the last few years, and wanting to be more engaged with the ongoing process going forward, being more engaged with the plan for each wastewater treatment, the future of building those capital reserves, and looking forward and being more engaged in the process. I've got Director Lee and then Director McMahon.
Thank you, Chair. That was well said. I think we do need to build up the individual plants' knowledge about both the operations and actually the long-term capital. And I think honestly, I think we're a good chunk of the way there, because it's very, very apparent we got their attention. I have a kind of a question though, and that is about I don't know if I'm the only one that I have plants that are relatively large and relatively not built out. And so then you end up with a very, very large user bill for the very few houses that are there. And it can go on for a lot of years when you have a big subdivision, especially when the plant's been built in anticipation of a much larger subdivision. In other words, phase 1, phase 2 of a subdivision. A specifically example I'd give you is Saginaw Ridge, where there's actually 29 lots but the 29th lot is a huge lot that's expected to subdivide into 11 more for a total of 40. So you have a very expensive plant that's being run, and running it is the right thing. Otherwise, if you don't do the maintenance, your asset disappears.
Mhm.
But that's all expenses. And I think that we need to do something about situations like that. And perhaps frontage fees is not a bad way to look after capital, but perhaps a user fee for maintenance, small user fee for maintenance for all lots need to be done until you reach a certain build out. I don't know if that's possible, but it seems like a pretty good solution for the situation I've got with Saginaw Ridge. Is that I'd be interested if staff knows of anybody that's doing that kind of thing.
I'd be interested in that as well, Director Lee, because I have two of the plants in Area B are within areas that aren't fully built out either. And so looking at what that's going to look like. So would any Remco or Tina or Kyle, Dean, Remco?
I think this is a CFO question, and
Okay.
I think she will be back.
Oh,
Yes.
yes.
Sorry, what was the question?
So the question is, for example, with Saginaw Ridge, there's a significant, the 29th lot can be built out into 11 lots. And so what are, Director Lee had it better, but because there's the potential of that last lot being built out, is there a possibility of doing a combination with some user fees for some of these lots that are going to be further developed and subdivided into other lots? Does that capture the spirit of your question, Director Lee?
Yes, I understand that the capital would go by frontage, but the maintenance portion of the O&M seems to me to be a common charge for all lots. So we should be issuing an expense charge to all lots to keep, because they're actually keeping the infrastructure current so that it is usable for everybody. And right now they're doing it with single user fees only when a house is built, which doesn't seem the right way of doing it. Seems everybody should share a little bit in that maintenance cost. Is it possible though?
Prior to it being joined to the system fully.
And for the ones that are already there, yeah.
Yeah.
And there's no houses yet.
So I would have to check the legislative framework, but I know the bylaw specifically. So I mean, Saginaw has its own bylaw, but typically what happens is you have to be a user or connected to the system. So an empty lot, it has an unused connection, so they're not using the system. So that's why there's some contemplation of, when you do hook up to the system, so when you are a new property and you do connect, it's almost like a latecomer payment. And that's the theory of the latecomer, is that you haven't paid for these user fees, so you're going to pay into the overall pot because everybody's had to shoulder the burden. Now, I'd have to look back to see if legislation allows us to charge a user fee if you aren't connected. That's typically why you charge sort of a different rate, because you're not actually using the system. It's a vacant property, so.
Okay, Director Lee, does that help?
Well, yeah, except I'd call it a maintenance fee, not a user fee. It's the operations and maintenance. So in fact, it would be the maintenance portion of the O&M for every lot. My other question was, had you ever heard of any municipality doing that, or regional district?
That's usually when you get latecomer agreements or connection fees that capture those fees when they do connect to the system. And I understand the challenge with this one because they've sat idle and it's quite a unique situation. So hopefully it's temporary.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, it's nothing that we can do about it this year anyways, so.
Director McMahon.
Sure. Another issue that was flagged in discussions is that people are asking who makes the decisions around the fees. I mean, yes, the board makes the decision, but say all 73 properties on the system were opposed to raising the fees. Should we raise them? In the cases where you have condo, whatever, where you already have an existing strata organization, then you have a decision-making body and a process in place. But when you don't have a strata, there really isn't any way to formally kind of get the permission or the buy-in or whatever the participants, and it becomes a really difficult issue. So again, we need to think about this in terms of how we communicate and how we make the decisions. Is how do people feel like they have meaningful say in what's happening?
Thank you, Director McMahon. And my apologies for all of the background movement in mine. I have a very loud dog right now. So over to you, CFO, please.
So as far as just the legislative framework, right? So it's really no different. Well, this can be argued, but because these are such specific local service areas that only a few people participate in. But generally speaking, there's an established service level for these particular plants. So whether it's, we need to service them, back to some of the points that were included in GM Rosenboom's slides, we have, environmental standards that we have to meet. And so that was part of what we put forward when we initially started the internal service review in 2017 and saying, look, we need to focus our attention on these particular services because, in some areas such as Wood Creek, we weren't meeting some of the environmental standards. So we needed more staff. We needed some more service levels. Those are the policy decisions, the service-based level that the board decides. And that then generates the rate, or the user rate that needs to be funded, right? So if the board makes the decision on that service level, then it would impact the rate. From the decision on the capital side, that's essentially, I think, the other part of this debate. And again, those are partially policy decisions. And I think what we're hearing is there's maybe some differences of opinion on some of the alignment. So if the board made a decision that, hey, we're gonna debt fund any future replacement, that's a policy decision. It's documented and everybody's aware of it. And how you come to that decision is, I think, part of the democratic process. So whether, you involve lots of feedback from the community group to get buy-in, I think this is where this unique service that we provide, meaning these little wastewater services, they require more care and attention than maybe some of our other services where it's more abstract, right? I don't know if that helps.
Yeah. Okay, Director Lee.
Yes, I believe our thank you, Chair, by the way. I believe our CFO hit it right on the nose. It's a policy decision, and the policy decision actually hasn't been made on the capital yet. And I would like to see, an advisory group formed to help us with that decision. Because advisory groups, they only have the one subject to deal with, so they can really look at it in depth, whereas we still got to keep the boiler stoked on our little boat and keep going in the right direction. So I keep getting the feedback that we've got this suggestion or that suggestion on capital, and why not? What's wrong with it? And so I think all of us as directors need to be able to say what's wrong with it or what's right with it. And I don't feel comfortable answering that question. The other thing, though, I want to give comment on, though, at our CFO just mentioned, and she hit it right on the head, and that is we went into this because the environmental standards weren't being met. It was alarming us. And not only that, our maintenance wasn't being done satisfactorily. And I knew of some dispersal fields that were growing up and being destroyed because of it. And so we needed to fix the user side of it, the operations and maintenance. And I believe that 2022 will be the end of that because we will have a really good handle on it. We'll have people in place and we'll have enough history so that we can project into the future. And I'd like to think that 2023 will be no more than perhaps a cost of living if we don't have enough reserves. So I wanted to make the comment that for me, I'm 100% okay with the user fees as proposed. The experts have looked at it. They've got enough data. We're sure close. We might be a dollar one way or another, but that's about it for me for the user fees. But I'd like to take it a little slower on the capital plan and take time in 2021 to build up a confidence level. For me, it's been a big learning curve because I have 7 of them in operations and they're all in various stages. And 2 of them, one that's time and charges and the other one that wants to come on board. So it's kind of overwhelming for me. So I could use a bit of a breather. Anyways, that's my thoughts.
Thank you, Director Lee. I've got Director McMahon again, but I'll just to tag on to your comment about the user fees. Overall, there's of course, there's some discomfort with the user fees, but there's more buy-in around that. Completely understand that the user fees need to go up. But the comments that were made earlier around the having a more transparent communication around the user fees and the statement of services and charges around the billing would be appreciated. And so I'm about where Director Lee is with the user fees as well. Comfortable with that, just looking for a more comprehensive communication going forward. And then the frontage fee piece is, there was definitely agreement about the need for the asset management plan and having capital reserves, but the disagreement within my community with what it was around the philosophy of funding and the length of the plan, length of an asset management plan of a 50-year plan. There was discomfort around that and disagreement about that. So I certainly would support the advisory group option as well going forward. I'm going to go to Director McMahon.
Right. As I said last week, there isn't going to be a one-size-fits-all solution for this because each situation is quite unique. One of the folks from Wood Creek Park has volunteered to write a little history of that plant, and I got to tell you, I've started to hear the war stories. That is a colorful, unique, epic history, and I think it will be helpful to staff to understand the neighborhood trauma when trying to go in there and talk about it. So just to say.
Great. And it's important to note when we inherit these plants from developers, it's there is a history that happens before we take them over. So I'm going to look to directors to see if there's any other overarching comments or, GM Rosenboom, please.
Thank you. Just want to put one comment forward with respect to an advisory group. And because it was brought up twice, three times by several directors. Earlier this year in January, the board made a resolution to establish an advisory committee for wastewater and to bring forward a budget proposal for to do so as part of the round 2 budget, which occurred, and the budget proposal ultimately wasn't for an advisory committee, but at that time, decision was made to support engagement sessions for each system individually. And this relates to the point just made by Director McMahon that are we looking for one solution for all the plants, one approach for all the plants, or will each plant ultimately requires its own approach in terms of funding of capital improvements moving forward? And so we had the engagement session due to COVID. We went, of course, virtual, which, as mentioned before, is not the ideal way of having engagement like on a topic like this. And as it looks like now, there will continue to be a challenge in 2021. I fully agree with that. So the question I have for the board to consider is, if an advisory committee would be established, what would be the scope of that advisory committee such that it would actually support board decision on funding for each of the plants moving forward? Would the scope be in one advisory committee per plant, or would it be a policy that would apply to all the plants? And how would it work? So before, it's just something to consider so that we are clear on what the board expects an advisory committee to do, and if the board would like us to develop terms of reference, etc., that we have some direction on what should be in there.
Okay. Thank you very much for that, GM Rosenboom, because that is something that we had motivated in January, and then it went to the public engagement. So and now we're circling back and we're saying, well, this isn't what we're hearing from our residents. This isn't what they had in mind, and they wanted to be more involved. So I'm going to go to Director McMahon. I see your hand up.
I have a hard time seeing how much a committee would help in my situation, because Sunnyside is so small that, and it's so bizarre that I don't think that a committee is going to help there. And Wood Creek Park has its own neighborhood association, which is taking this on right now. They've got a bunch of talent there. They've got retired engineers and a bunch of people who are motivated to really dig in. So while the only piece of this, and it might better rest with staff, but I wonder where we go going forward, because based on my experience to date, I sure wouldn't want to take on any more of these sewage treatment plants. I mean, this is not a great solution. I ran the Director Lee and I have had a conversation about this, and we kind of disagree. But you know, I've run the numbers and I have compared what the people on these plants are paying relative to what it cost me to pump out my septic, and what it costs, say, in the town of Gibsons for the sewer fees. And these are expensive. They really, truly are. It may be that the town of Gibsons isn't charging enough. And it's also true that the playing field is not level, because the level of scrutiny on these plants is much higher than the level of scrutiny on the tank in my backyard. The inspectors are not coming around and checking my discharge. So it's a really difficult situation, but I sure hope that we have And I think we asked for a report on this, that what is our ability to make decisions around these kind of plants going forward into the future.
Thanks, Director McMahon. Director Lee?
First of all, I'd like to thank GM Rosenboom for his patience and reminding me of our earlier decision. Like I say, sometimes when you're up to your asses in alligators, you forget you actually set out to drain the swamp. Now I'm having second thoughts about a call for an advisory committee, because as Jan Rosenboom said, you'd need one for every plant, and that's not a logical solution. I don't know if we're ready to make a decision on this right now, though. Perhaps we could put it off until later.
We do need to make a decision at some point, Director Lee. So
if we have a say, I would be in favor of individual consultations, and we'll just need to perhaps revisit when and how we do it, because I know we're going to have to use Zoom if we're going to do it in 2021, but perhaps everybody, including our electorate, is becoming more comfortable with the use of computers and Zooms, and we ourselves have gotten better at the various techniques we can use to do it. So if you want to know the way I'm thinking we should stick with individual consultations and talk about future capital by plant.
Okay. Director Seegers.
So sounds like there are a couple things. One is the decision for this year, and then the decision ongoing, and ensuring that the residents actually understand the funding model that's being used. So you've asked for information to be posted for each of the areas on the website, which would give the background information. So it might be that if a decision is made for this year, but the subsequent years at this point is put on hold until you kind of circle back to your residents after that information is available. Because it looks like you want to make a decision for long-term capital funding, but they don't have enough information and are confused about it. So you don't feel comfortable making that decision because they don't know what you're talking about. Having the information on the website would provide that. So it might be that if you make the decision now for next year, this information goes out with the utilities, it's on the website, could circle back, early fall with the residents to find out if they're comfortable with it, to actually inform the ongoing capital outlay.
Thank you, Director Seegers. I think that's a good way of putting it together. Director McMahon and then Director Hiltz.
Yeah, the decisions in the staff report are strictly for 2021. So that's what we're dealing with today. And the decision, the other decision though, was about whether or not to do an advisory committee, which I've just said, no, thanks.
GM Rosenboom.
Hearing the conversation, hearing the discussion, what we could do is I could work with staff, other staff, including our communication manager, to develop a communication plan for next year. Bring that back to a future committee in time for any financial consideration to be included in the budget. And that way, if there are financial consequences, that they are included, but there is also clarity on the process moving forward, what we're proposing for each of the systems. Because I fully agree with what has been said. Even though it might not be ideal, virtual might mean that we have to go that way, but address letters, mail outs to residents can also help a long way to make sure that everybody gets the information that they need to get. And so we can work on something that we for the future. And I heard a point about lack of trust and confidence in the SRD. And as GM, as you indicated, Lori Pat, you take a responsibility for the decisions you in the past. I do that as well for my staff in the past, to the extent that I can, and that it is my responsibility. And I can assure you that with the staff we have right now, we're doing everything to make to have the plans in a place where they should be from an environmental stewardship perspective and from a cost efficiency perspective. And it's unfortunate that staff for additional wastewater coordinator, for example, was approved in 2021 as part of the budget. We're hired, finally, we're able to hire somebody, person left us, and luckily enough for the coast, person is currently contributing to the wastewater systems at the town of Gibsons, and we have now been able to find a replacement now for 3/4 years. So those kind of things are, while we're trying our best to increase our operating and maintenance and care of these systems, there are other circumstances that are sometimes making that more difficult than we're striving for.
Thank you, GM Rosenboom. And we a lot of it is the, I think when we went into the asset management plan last year, I think it was a huge wake-up call for all of us, not just as a board, not just as staff, but as a community, on the amount of infrastructure and then the intricacies with each one of these wastewater treatment plants and moving forward, and the philosophy of how to look at that and to fund it. And I commend the infrastructure staff and the financial staff and Kyle. I mean, the hundreds of hours, and I think I must have spent about half of it with you online, spent talking to residents and trying to, trying to answer all of the questions. And the reality is we are here now and trying to move forward and trying to rebuild that trust bank and rebuild the confidence, rebuild community confidence in our organization, because these stewardship of these assets is our responsibility, and proper financial management of the monies within these that we collect and we tax our citizens for it's really important that we do it as transparently and as prudently as possible, and it can be difficult, and but we learn from each day, and we move forward in a better way. I've got Director Hiltz and then Director McMahon.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I'm going to tag on to that. This is an iterative process. We get through 1 year, we get more information, we inform the public, and we do it again next year. And hopefully, in 5 years from now, we're not looking back and going, we should have done something 5 years ago, right? So this is about 1 year at a time for me. And there is this phasing of the incremental 5 years out. Those numbers are pretty high. There's just no getting around it. But that seems to be the reality based on the experts that we have on staff. And no one has come up to me and has presented an alternative to the plans that have been proposed by staff, aside from, whoa, don't go forward with them. I haven't heard anything. So for me, it's 1 year at a time. Improve the communications, repeat the cycle again and again and again. And I think the SCRD is much better positioned now than 10 years ago to do that. I think. I believe so. I know so. Know so. Believe so. I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Hiltz. Director McMahon.
Yeah, it's fairly clear that residents don't understand the challenges we face with these plants. And there's a lot of reasons for that. There's a lot of technical stuff. People were asking me technical questions. I don't know the answers to technical questions. There's a financial piece, which is a fairly sophisticated financial piece involving, debt financing and taxation and all that legislative stuff. This is not a simple thing. So I would be happy to move that we ask GM Rosenboom to come back to us with a communications plan for the wastewater facilities for 2021.
Okay, and would you include, now communications plan, would that include engagement as well, or just communications?
Communications and engagement.
Okay, just wanted to make sure your motion was amended before it was seconded. Okay, and GM Rosenboom, does that capture what you're hearing as well?
Yes, that worked.
Okay, all right. And do I have a seconder for Director McMahon's motion? I see Director Lee. Any further discussion on this item? Director Hiltz.
Does the scope of that include the user fees and the frontage fees in terms of the reporting back? Is like the user fees report has sort of a variance report already in it, but you're thinking of the total package of communication, not just user fees or frontage fees. Is that, yeah, okay.
Okay. GM Rosenboom, would you like that itemized in the motion, or is that sufficient as is?
I think it's sufficient as is. But I'm not sure what the current motion exactly, how it is worded, to see if it captures everything. Jennifer, would you be able to help?
Go ahead, Jennifer.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go right ahead.
That staff develop a communications and engagement plan for 2021 wastewater user fees and frontage fees, and that staff subsequently bring back a report to a future meeting with recommendations in time for the financial considerations to be included in the upcoming budget.
Okay. Does that capture what I'm hearing from directors? Okay, Director Hiltz.
I'm just wondering about the timeline of this. Is the most critical time is when the utility bills go out in July or June, when they go out?
There's
Well,
a go ahead, GM Rosenboom, and then I'll tag on.
Well, we'll make sure that this is brought to you at least before round 2, and we will try before round 1 of the budget to make sure that we have it in place prior to the utility bills going out, and then financial implications in terms of if we require some additional staff resources under the form of reserves, that they can be included in the budget from this year.
Okay. And regarding communications, regarding the engagement side of the motion, there's a like communicating is one thing, because then you're communicating decisions we've made in 2020 that have effect in 2021. But when we're looking at engagement, we would need to be looking at that prior to setting the rates in the fall. That's like what we're doing right now. So the engagement piece, however we choose to move forward, or however that moves forward, has to be done prior to this meeting, I would say next year. Does that make sense? And am I capturing that? Yeah.
That will be an intent, and I think there will be no need to include it in the. It's to support any decisions on rate 2022 and moving forward. So we will make sure that that will be the end result, that they can that a report will be brought forward prior to that.
And it's important to note, like, especially with a few of our a few of our areas do have stratas in place, so they already have a mechanism for helping to engage within their community as they set budgets for their stratas. So there is some structure in place already with some of these wastewater treatment plants as well that will certainly help with communications and engagement. So moving forward as we go. Okay. So we have a motion on the floor. Is there any further discussion on this? Okay. Seeing none, I am going to, would you like me to read it back, or would you like Jennifer to read it back, or can we vote on this? Are we good? Okay, I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? And this would be, oh, this is only rural areas only, I would imagine, right, Sherry? Okay, so rural areas only. All those in favor? Thank you. Motion carries. Okay, any other discussion on the overview of the GMs and the report? Or can we move on to the next section of our agenda? I'll look to my other directors. Okay. Thank you for the conversation on this. Oh, Director Lee.
Sorry, I was just wondering, what are we moving to? We're just finishing Remco's first report, number 1?
Yes, and now we're going to.
Cool, thank you.
Okay. I was getting there. I just was making sure I wasn't missing anyone in the general conversation. The next up thing on our agenda is Annex A, pages 1 to 62 of our package. And this is the wastewater 2021 frontage fee reviews. And so with that, would staff like to reintroduce this report or let it stand as presented previously?
Thank you for the opportunity. I think the introduction made also was for this report. So there you go.
Great. Okay. Great. Okay. So directors. Oh, sorry. I have to go back to my other agenda here. I'm going to look to my rural directors. We have received this report. I'm going to look to you for some direction on how you want to move forward, or if you have any other questions about the frontage fees. If there's anything that you have not yet brought up. Director Lee, we'll start with you.
For me, I think I understand the reports quite well. The only thing I'd like to see is table 16 update, a couple updates in table 16 to the rates on the individual plants.
Okay.
And I'd like to hear from staff if my suggestions will still allow sufficient funding to meet our legislated requirements.
Okay. Is staff ready to go there now, or do we have any other general questions first? Because I have 1 or 2 general questions that I promised I would ask in this meeting. So Len, if we can do that, if that's okay, we can do a couple of general questions first and then go on. So one of the questions I was asked was how commercial entities are charged frontage fees. And the example brought up was the Secret Cove plant, because there is, for example, there's the, I believe, 29 residential units, and then there's the commercial unit that has a marina, the restaurant, and 3 small housing units on it. So I'm wondering how the difference is between commercial entities and with frontage fees in particular. CFO?
Yeah, so bylaw 428 does have specific areas for a marina operating within a specified area. It also has a specific fee for restaurants, cafeteria, coffee shop, licensed lounge, or pub. And so, yeah, those are specified in there. And then depending on how the residential properties would be included would also be included. I don't have a copy of that specific bill in front of us. And so, yeah, it's outlined in the bylaw.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you, CFO. I appreciate that. Any other general questions from directors? I'm just checking mine because I know I had a couple, but I think I've already gotten to them. Okay, so nothing else from the other directors, general questions about frontage fees? Okay, so Director Lee, you have some suggestions for changes on table 16. And that is on, I'm sorry, the page number of our package. I believe it was page 12 of our package.
Yes, I do.
Okay. All right. So Director Lee, would you like to start then with, or should we maybe just start from the top and go down? Would that work? Oh, you're muted, Len. Let's start from the top and go down, and then the director from the area can comment on those. How does that sound? So Greaves, area A.
Greaves, no change.
Okay. So you're $202 for 2021.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Director McMahon, Wood Creek, 302. You're good with that for 2021. Sunnyside, 202 for 2021. Okay. With Jolly Roger and Secret Cove, this is the meeting I had last night. I'm wondering if my first question is what Director Lee had asked earlier, if we do not have an increase to frontage fees this year, will that affect any capital expenditures, any proposed capital expenditures for 2021?
The answer is for both. The budget proposals are $9,000 each for both projects, and the current reserve level is 39 and 12. So for Secret Cove, there were only 3,000 left in terms of capital reserves, if the rates would stay the same as they were in 2020. For Jolly Roger, it would be go from 39,000 to 30,000.
Okay. Okay. Okay, because I will say, from what I heard from Jolly Roger residents last night, they were, and from speaking with the president, they were okay with an increase. However, Secret Cove was not. And Secret Cove has less financial reserves, capital reserves. But they were the group I spoke with, which was the majority of the strata last night, were very much against any kind of increase for 2021. And so this is putting me in a tough spot. So okay. For Jolly Roger, we can oh my gosh, I need a moment to think about this, so I'm going to go to Director Lee for Lee Bay first.
Thank you, Chair. On Lee Bay, there's actually fairly good reserves, and there's no capital planned in the short term. So I will leave it at 2020 levels, so $102.
Okay. Square Bay has asked for no increase. Would that affect any capital plans for the upcoming year? To leave it at 217.42.
Thank you for the question. It would mean that there would be no contribution made to the capital reserves, as the current level would is only funding the debt servicing, but the current reserve level is $45,000. So there is something in reserves, and I don't see that the issues with the collection system we're currently assessing. I hope it will be sufficient. If not, the difference between the additional funds that would be collected from this year would not be sufficient then as well. If we need to do big investments, it would be big investments on the collection system. So to answer your question, I don't think that there is a risk to any capital investment we have to make this year by not increasing the fees for this year.
So if we have to make if we have to make any capital investment in Square Bay for this year, the amounts that we would be collecting at 217.42, because it is only covering debt servicing at this time, it's not contributing to reserves. And because there's an assessment going on in the collection system right now. So what I'm hearing is that the 217.42 and the capital reserve may not be sufficient if there's a significant issue with the collection system.
If it's significant, not if it's minor, we can do it. But then the 44, $800 that's currently in the reserve should be enough at that time.
Okay, CFO.
Yeah, and so any funding shortfalls, just depending on what these various scenarios are, is that there are some operating reserves. And so, obviously whatever is found, just an example with Square Bay, it might further impact their operational reserves. So those are just some considerations.
Okay. So for Square Bay, I heard very clearly from them that they do not want to see an increase for next year in frontage fees. And so at this time, I'm going to suggest staying at the 217.42, and with they were clear because they wanted more additional engagement around the future capital plan. So that's why they were not, the direction from them or the message from them is that they wanted to ensure that we had more engagement around the future asset management plan before they continue to contribute to reserves. So if there is a shortfall, then it will come out of operational, is what I'm hearing. So, okay, so 217.42 for 2021 for Square Bay. Next up, Langdale, Director Hiltz. You're good at 202 for 2021. Okay, Canoe Road, Director Lee.
Yes, I'm fine with the 424.30. They're paying back an investment right now, so that's good. And the same with Merril, the $100 more. I suspect that's because we're running a little short on there, so we'll leave it at the proposed 326.71.
Okay, thank you. And Curran Road, They, because they asked, I promised them a commitment to to further engage, and they said they were okay with the 100 for next year, so 253 for 2021 for Curran Road. Roberts Creek, Director Ties.
Yes, Roberts Creek Co-housing, as indicated in the previous meeting, is okay with scenario 1, and that is there's no objection to the plan going ahead.
So to clarify, is that $304 for 2021 for frontage fees?
Yeah, I believe
That's indeed correct. That's
yeah, I believe the Strata has shared the resolution with staff, and that's all already communicated to staff.
Terrific, thank you. Lily Lake, Director Lee. You do have a lot of these wastewater treatment plants.
Yes, I'm fortunate. I'd like to make that $204 as opposed to 300. We're just starting to build up a capital reserve, and they have no immediate requirements for capital that I'm aware of. And the operation reserve is fairly healthy. I guess they put the capital went in there instead of, I believe that's correct. Mr. Rosenboom, am I okay with that one?
There are no capital reserves as indicated, but there are indeed operational reserves that could be used for capital expenditures if needed. Correct.
Okay, so yeah, we'll start with the capital reserves this year at the 204 then.
Okay, and 204 or 304?
204 for
204 for Lily Lake for 2021.
Yes.
Okay.
That was the earlier discussion, Chair, was that we did charge a $204 frontage fee in 2020, but it actually went into a common reserve.
Right.
So this one here will be a restricted capital reserve now in 2021.
Terrific, thank you. And then Painted Boat?
Yes, the manager there said had talked to staff about it and was comfortable with the $202 for 2021, and did send me, I was copied on an email on that. So
perfect.
There was some concerns about user fees, but I think that's a done deal, what we got.
Okay. And then Saginaw Ridge.
Saginaw Ridge, I believe, should stay at 670.27. That's because the plant is actually in good shape, and I'm not aware of any capital. I'm a little confused, though. I wouldn't mind some comments from staff on that. For the fact that the $200, the $100 or more on user doesn't make up for 29 users paying $670 that was used for user fees. So am I going to have enough money for user fees in 2021?
Thank you.
No matter what I do with this frontage, I ain't going to change that part.
Okay, Jam Rosenboom.
Thank you for the question. Saginaw is the only one, Saginaw Ridge is the only treatment plant where currently frontage fees are still subsidizing, supporting daily operation maintenance of the facility. This rate, 845.27, would not result in any capital reserves being built up. Everything would go to, the increased amount would go to operating maintenance. So if this one would be reduced, the user fees would need to be increased to make sure that we have a balanced budget for that system.
I think we need to talk to the CFO because she told me I couldn't do that. She said, now that we've established a capital reserve, that money will go into capital reserve and can only be used for that. We might have a problem.
I think this is the system. This is the only system where we are slowly working towards rectifying the fact that user fees are supported by frontage fees. So last year and this year, we're trying to move that down. But as you indicated before, we recognize that there are still systems, that are still properties undeveloped here. So historically, they are supporting the user fees, the undeveloped properties. And we haven't rectified that fully yet. And currently, as it is right now, we're not planning to rectify that. We're not recommending to rectify that as of now, given the still significant amount of unbuilt property, undeveloped properties. If you would like us to be fully in compliance with the sustainability policy, we can recommend what the user fee would be. But this is pure 100% to fund increased operation and maintenance costs and not to build up reserves.
Or can we do that? Tina?
CFO?
I think we just need to have a little powwow with staff.
Okay. Can we, before, what I'm going to do, I have like 2 questions to ask, or well, the one question, I guess, about Jolly Roger and Secret Cove is just the operational reserves that we have in those plants. And then maybe we can take a brief recess to allow staff a chance to meet and just take a bit of a break for the directors to just sink their heads into.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so operating, what are the operational reserves for Jolly Roger and Secret Cove?
So based on the last report that was provided at pre-budget, and I don't have what any of the commitments are. You asked about Jolly Roger. So Jolly Roger has a operating reserve of about $13,000.
Okay.
And Secret Cove has about 29,000.
Okay.
In operating.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so what we're going to do is we'll take a brief recess to, because I know Director Lee had a question for staff that the CFO indicated that just wanted to have connect with staff on. And it gives us just a chance to just maybe take a break and review where we're at and then come back. Would 12 minutes be enough and come back at 3:25? Would that work for staff? Will that be enough time? And for directors, and go outside and get a breath of fresh air? Okay. All right. We'll see you back at 3:25. And welcome back to our special board meeting of December 3rd, 2020. Thank you for your patience. And sorry, my voice just cracked there. Apparently I need a little more water. And we'll return back to our conversation on wastewater treatment fees and frontage fees specifically for 2021. Staff did, I know Director Lee, before we went to the break, had some questions and wanted some clarity. Do we need to repeat the question that Director Lee had, or does staff want to go directly into any comments around that? And it was specifically around the Saginaw Ridge wastewater plant. Okay, CFO?
Yeah, so in essence, with Saginaw in the unique position it's in, the frontage fees are still subsidizing the user side because there are still only 8 users on the system. So when we originally presented the report, we had anticipated that we would look to balance the budget of user fees and frontage fees to align with the new financial sustainability policy over a 3-year term. With the significant increase with the being proposed this year due to the septage disposal, etc., those particular balancing can't be realized as quickly as we anticipated. If we change any of the existing frontage fees, what in essence would occur, and anyone jump in if they like, if we reduce frontage fees by $100, the users will have to pick that up 4 to 1. So it'd have to be co-op $400. So there is a significant impact to changing the frontage fees to the user fees in the subsequent report. So
okay, I'm going to go to Director Lee.
So on table 16, we'll have to leave it at the proposed for 2021 of 845.27. We need the money.
Okay. And then the rest of the frontage fee rates, are we okay to change any of those, or do they need to go forward as previously presented?
For me, as previously presented, are okay. The changes that I talked about earlier for Area A.
Okay.
It's just Saginaw that I was going to drop Saginaw down to 670, but I can't. There's not enough money if I do it. So it'll have to stay at 845.27 for Saginaw.
Okay. But for any of the other rates, we're okay to change them for 2021, just to confirm. I saw GM Rosenboom and then Mr. Doyle. So GM Rosenboom.
Thank you. I think the only ones where we don't have confirmation yet from, in this case, you is Jolly Roger and Secret Cove.
Director Pratt, you're muted.
Sorry. Thank you. Thank you, Director Seegers. I had to, I've got a barking dog in the background. Okay, so for Jolly Roger and Secret Cove, it's the operational reserves are okay on Secret Cove. Like, this should be able to, but with the capital reserves not being, especially with the work that's being proposed for this upcoming year, it's going to significantly reduce any capital reserves at Secret Cove. And one of the comments I heard really clear last night is they want to see, like, they want to know the plan going forward, because they are scheduled, or it's there's the potential of replacing the plant at an estimated 2029. And what I was hearing from them last night is they want to see the engineering report before they move forward. They have a very active strata that manages everything very closely. So they were not in favor of putting any kind of money towards the capital side, but with having the work, in that area, as well as more work potentially for 2024 and 2029, it's not, for me, it's not financially responsible to not put anything away for this, or not increase a contribution for this year. And especially with the operational reserves, may be okay with Secret Cove. With Jolly Roger, it's, you know, they're kind of, one's good and the other one's, so if anything were to go amiss or awry this year, then we do have some issues, we'll have some issues coming up. So I know they asked me last night to not put an increase. I think it's financially prudent to put some kind of increase in at this time. So what I am going to suggest is a $50 increase for 2021 for Secret Cove and for Jolly Roger. So it would be $152 for each one for 2021 for frontage fee changes. And because I think that's a financially prudent choice to do in this case with these systems. Okay. GM Rosenboom?
Maybe also for, maybe I can clarify the budget proposals for if there are some residents of those systems currently listening. So that they understand what the proposals are for. Maybe that will help in providing the clarity. Both treatment systems are consisting of multiple tanks to treat the water, and the screen in between the two tanks in both systems have filled, and there are large holes in them, which is causing a lot of trash to move into the second tank, and causing us a lot of operational costs to clean it second time, extra pump outs, as well as damage to pumps that we have in those systems. So it's really there's a capital investment needed to long-term reduce the operational cost of the or the operational issues we're currently having with both systems.
Thank you, GM Rosenboom. I appreciate that. And so I know they'll, I want them to know that I did definitely hear what they had to say last night, but moving forward, I think putting something away in and moving towards more engagement next year with them will certainly help, and increasing some communication around their fees over the next year will certainly help as well. Director Lee, I did see your hand up, but I saw it's down now. Are there did you have another comment or question?
No, I just wanted to clarify that there was only two that I didn't go with staff recommendations, and that was Lee Bay, stayed at 2020, and Lily Lake stayed at 2020. Otherwise, staff recommendations for all the others.
Mm-hmm. And for me, it's 3 out of the 4. Thank you. And everything else is following staff recommendations. Okay. Okay. Good. Okay. So going back to the top here of page, one moment, please. Page 2 of our agenda, no, page 1 of our agenda. So, so we now, so we've put those together, and staff is clear on the numbers that the board's provided for the frontage fees. So what I'm going to ask, I guess we'll have a new recommendation that the respective rate bylaws be amended to reflect the proposed 2021 frontage fees as amended in table 16 of the report. Does that work, CAO or CO? Okay. And that the 2021-2025 financial plan be amended accordingly. And I don't need the other piece because we're at a board meeting, so it's being adopted here. So, okay. So, rural directors, this is up to you. Can I have a motion to? I see that I'm going to look to my rural directors. I see a mover in Director McMahon, seconder, Director Hiltz. Any further conversation on this? Seeing none, I'm going to call the question. Rural directors, all those in favor? Thank you. Motion carries. Okay, thank you very much for a very detailed conversation. Next up on the agenda is the Annex B, pages 63 to 89 of the package, and it's the 2021 wastewater user fee review. So Manager Asset Management or GM Rosenboom or CFO Perot, would any of you like to introduce this at this time? Or as presented previously, GM Rosenboom?
It's more as presented recently. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Lee? You're muted. Still muted.
I'm good, thank you. Sorry. Down
Okay.
goes my pen.
Okay, perfect. Director McMahon?
Yeah, I just had a question about the reserve contribution for Sunnyside. I didn't ask that last time. I understand this is a temporary extra reserve contribution. Could somebody clarify on that?
Okay, staff, Mr. Doyle, did you want to take that one or? Okay.
Thank you, Chair. That's correct, Director McMahon. The purpose of the reserve contribution is to reach a operation reserve for each service that's sufficient for the size of the service. I believe Sunnyside is one of the smaller services, and that threshold is $7,500. There's also some considerations about upcoming work with the feasibility study and such. You can see that reserve contribution was introduced last year with an intended period of 5 years, and because of the staff vacancy and the subsequent hastened contribution to the operational reserves, we've been able to remove it for most of the service areas, but Sunnyside has a little bit longer left to go.
Thank you. One of the questions that I've been asked over the last couple of days, and I said I would ask this in the public meeting so that it was on public record, and it's regarding support services. And so the questions around that is what is included in the support services charge, and how is it prorated by user or by parcel? So over to staff, if you can, GM Rosenboom or CFO, who would like to take that? CFO?
Well, the support service allocation policy was presented as part of the pre-budget. So included in that is all the IT support, HR, finance related charges, and it really depends based on the particular operational budget is how those particular different components are allocated to the service. So it's not directly allocated based to the user, it's the size of the budget. So and what type of services and the support model that they participate in. So for instance, there's very few staff included in the wastewater services, so they would pay a very small percentage of some of the components within support services.
Terrific. And yeah, and thank you for that. And I will direct, I'll make sure that that gets sent out to the people that asked that question as well. Thank you.
Yeah, happy to answer them as well.
Perfect. Okay. Any other questions? Okay, seeing no other questions, directors. So we have a couple of recommendations on page 63. That the respective rate bylaws be amended to reflect the proposed 2021 user fees detailed in table 2 of the report, and that the 2021-2025 financial plan be amended accordingly. Are we ready for that motion, or are there any changes that you'd like to see? Director Lee, I see your hand up.
I'm sorry, you guys.
That's okay.
For Saginaw, I believe that the rate was set for 8 users, and I think we have 10 users now. Does anybody know for sure on Saginaw if that's correct? Or have they not come on stream yet?
So I'm seeing from our manager of asset management, they haven't come on stream yet. Is that correct? Or is that just a, sorry.
That's my understanding at this time, is that, the roles that identify who's a user and who's not is updated annually. So.
Okay.
Okay. So before we go to a motivator for the recommendations, are there any changes? Well, no, because we've, I think we've discussed this because of the proposed budget implications. Changing user fees would mean a change in budget proposals as well. And so that's probably Mr. Doyle.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to identify, this was brought up at the beginning when this was introduced last week. I don't see the updated number here in the report. Lily Lake needs to be revised, I believe. I'm sorry, I'm just having some technical difficulties logging into the VPN here to see the exact numbers. But $562 for the 2020 user fees is incorrect. We're looking at $640 at that time. Just give me 1 second here while this logs in.
Were there any other questions while Mr. Doyle is logging in? Director Hiltz?
Sure, I just wanted to follow up on the support service allocation for the outreach and all the various activities that staff have been doing. Is that actually get a proportion down to the service level, or is there some joint budget item that accounts for all the outreach?
It's a good question. Remco, did you want to take that?
I can take it. Currently, the outreach that has been conducted has been, sorry, well, most of it has been booked to support services, which has been a significant amount. And when I was just talking about 2021, we don't feel that is, given the efforts taken, it's more not really support services anymore. And as we're moving forward, and we're really shifting to that, is that those costs would have to be, will be charged to the individual projects, because at least part of it. And so we're making the transition as we speak.
Okay. Thank you. That covers your question, Director Hiltz. Okay. CFO, anything to add on that, or it's good? Good. Great. Okay. Mr. Doyle, did you have an answer for the Lily Lake?
Thank you, Chair. Just to finish my thought, the 2020 user fee for Lily Lake should read $640.69, and the 2021 user fee should read $701.37. Apologies, that wasn't corrected between these last two meetings.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. Is it possible to make sure that that's corrected on the website version of the agenda, please? Just so that if someone's going back and looking at it, they're getting the correct numbers. Thank you. Okay, any other questions on user fees? Seeing none. Mr. Doyle, I see your hand still up, but I'm assuming it was just to answer that question. Okay, perfect. Okay, so let's go back to page 63. And I'm going to ask rural directors. So this is a way to vote, rural directors only. I'm going to ask for a motivator for the recommendation that the respective rate bylaws be amended to reflect the proposed 2021 user fees detail. I'm going to say detailed and amended, just to make sure that we don't miss the Lily Lake amendment in table 2 of the report, on that the 2021-2025 financial plan be amended accordingly. So rural directors, can one of you, I see a motivator and a seconder. Any further discussion on this? See none, I will call the question. All those in favor? Thank you. Those opposed? Okay, just making sure. Motion carries. Okay. Thank you, everyone, for that terrific discussion. Up next, we have no communications, motions, bylaws, but we will be moving in camera. So just hang on one moment here. So if I can have a motion that the public, so what I'm going to explain for any of our attendees that are still in the audience, we are going to make the motion to go in camera, and then after that, we will go to you, to any attendees if they have questions, and then you will be excluded from the meeting. So our motion is that the public be excluded from attendance at the meeting in accordance with sections 91A and C of the community charter. So may I have that motion, please? So moved, seconded. All those in favor? Thank you. Motion carries. Before we move to the questions from the public, what I will say is thank you so much to staff for your patience, your diligence with the board, and the background support in getting these questions answered, and all of the work that's been done with the public and residents on these issues. And we really appreciate it, and very, very appreciative of all the work, and including Kyle, though those massive amounts of hours on Zoom. So thank you very, very much. With that, I see we have Peter in the audience who has his hand raised. Peter, if you unmute yourself, you can ask your question.
Hi, Laurie. Thanks very much. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Peter. Go ahead.
Okay. Hello, board and staff. Some of you may remember me. I spoke at the January session, January 2020 session, and spoke on this topic when it was before what's the name of the committee? Your committee meeting leading up to the board meeting at that time. I have some concerns, I guess, about what I have heard here today. And I'm going to speak, I haven't been authorized to speak on behalf of Square Bay. I'm part of a group that is working here on this issue, but I'm jumping in here just in case, because I feel this needs to be said. The reason that Square Bay really resisted increases this year was to make a point that we believe that the asset management plan, as in front of the board at the moment, is incomplete in some areas. And quite honestly, we believe there's information that the board really should have to be making decisions, particularly, definitely about future rates. We are concerned that the report gets some level, but by it passing through the board here today, that it may end up having, if you will, the board looking at it later and saying, well, this got passed and approved, so we're going to follow that. I think a second point I would make is that there have been comments made that it seems there's a perception around the board that the real problem here is communication with the public, so that the public understand what the asset management plan is saying and what the challenges are that are being incurred at the various facilities. I can tell you that in Square Bay, there is the issue, the problem here is not one of inadequate understanding. We fully understand what's been presented. We disagree with some of the principles that are being used in developing the numbers that are in there. So I would hope that the motion that was approved early in this meeting to include community involvement somehow deals with that. We shouldn't be put in a position where the asset management plan is now a fait accompli. There should be some opportunity here for us to give you serious comments around the changes we believe need to be made. We fully understand the need for financing of the facilities. It's how you are getting at the numbers is part of our problem. And you may remember I said right at the very start in January that there's a decent mix of debt and reserves. Plus, at that time I said grants. Now I realize that you can't really directly factor in grants, so that becomes part of the debt side that you would reduce if you get a grant. That philosophy still is there, and the recommended motion, the recommended approach that you have in the asset management plan for Square Bay would approximately put 95% of the required funds over the next 50 years available from reserves, meaning there's only about 5% potentially to be covered in debt. That is, I believe, fundamentally the wrong way to go. It's an inappropriate amount to put on reserves. The balance should be far closer. And quite frankly, if I was in the government and looking at a grant application and I saw that I had 95% already accounted for, I'd probably look at it and say, why do I even need to give a grant? So I'm going to leave it at that. I think there are significant challenges within the asset management plan financials as they sit. And I would hope that the board will leave that opportunity for potential revisions or whatever to be made to that document. I'll end it at that. Thank you, Laurie.
Thank you, Peter. Donna, I see your hand up. Did you have a question for Peter or a response?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that the decisions today were only about 2021. The question of how much is enough to put in a capital reserve is a conversation we haven't had yet. And we are going to have it with the folks. There are a few folks out there who don't want to pay anything. Good luck with that. But the broader conversation of how much money to put aside and when and on what kind of a scale, and 50 years is a long time. It really is. So I think the appetite in my area is going to be for 5 to 10 year horizon. But again, that's going to be another conversation that we're going to have over 2021.
Okay.
And Andreas, did you have a question or comment for Peter as well?
Yeah, I just wanted to acknowledge that, I think I hear those comments, and I think that in the long term, that's correct. We need to talk about those, about the balance of where reserves, where borrowing, and where grants come in, and that you do need a certain amount of borrowing in order for the grants to be able to be applied. So I agree with you, Peter.
Thank
Okay.
you, Peter.
Thanks, Ariel. I'll mute here now.
Okay, thank you. Have a great day.
You too. Same for
Okay.
you. Thank you.
I have Rick Jesperson. Okay, Rick, go ahead.
Thank you. I have looked over all of the support material for this meeting, but I am new to this whole issue, so forgive me. But I have to ask if there's a 25-word answer or less as to the difference between frontage fees and user fees. I have not been able to find any explanation of that. Is there a simple answer to what the difference?
Remco, do you want to take that one?
I can try. In my introduction presentation, I listed that user fees are funding operating and maintenance costs of a facility, where frontage fees are funding capital improvements. That can be a replacement, a large repair of systems. Will that help?
Absolutely, that is terrific. I'm sorry that I overlooked that.
No worries.
One more question. When and where will this information be online? So I cannot list 15 different price increases in the story, but I would like to be able to refer people to where they can find that out by about midweek next week. Where would that be? What the new fees will be for 21?
Sherry, maybe are you the best one to answer that? It's your department, communications.
Thank you, Chair. So initially, the first place they'll be is in the board agenda that will be distributed tomorrow. It'll be on our website. So those bylaws will be going forward next week for readings at the December 10th board. We will be amending them and placing them on an agenda tomorrow. And I will be connecting with our communications manager following this call. And we've already talked about having some very, very obvious place on our website. Probably a link from the homepage is what we'll suggest, but there will be very clear direction for people when they arrive at the SCRD website where they can go to get more information.
Okay. People, I think the general public, people who are not used to doing this, do have difficulty navigating agendas. So I would encourage you to get that up as quickly as possible in a more direct way.
We will.
Thanks very much.
Thank you, Rick. Okay, I'm assuming Rick and Peter have asked all the questions. We had one third person. Andy, if you have a question, Andy, if you could raise your hand, otherwise we are going to close the meeting. Any further questions? I know I'm going to lower Peter's hand, lower Rick's hand, and I'm not seeing any other hands up. Okay, so with that, I'm going to ask IT to close the meeting. Thank you all for being here with us. And directors and staff, if you can just take a minute to have a quick stretch and secure your space, and we'll go into closed or in camera. Okay, so, you gotta go. You gotta go. Come on. Go. Sorry, I had to chase a dog out of my room.
Don't need her sharing secrets.
And welcome back to the special board meeting of December 3rd, 2020. You've returned to just in time for us to adjourn. May I have a motion to adjourn, please? So moved, seconded. All those in favor? Thank you. Motion carries. Thank you so much for joining us today, and we'll see you all next week. Bye.